response to the town of Lunenburg, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, is currently following the guidance from the town of Lunenburg Board of Health, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the CDC regarding virus and steps communities can take to prevent the spread of the virus in all town facilities. Well, that's not true. But in accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, some public meetings are being conducted remotely, such as this one. There was an agenda posted on the calendar for the town. There is a link on the agenda. As always, if you want to come and talk to us, we're happy to have public comment. But if you miss the meeting, then that won't work. So if you're watching this as a recording, you can always find the agenda with the link to the meeting on the town calendar. So the first thing is public comment. Is there anyone from the public who wants to comment? I don't even see anybody from the public on here.
Correct.
All right. At which point we now transition to new business. But before we get there, can we have our guests introduce themselves?
Sure. I'm Chuck Patterson from Bartholomew Company. I'm Senior Vice President and manager of the institutional/municipal team. We manage some of the town of Lunenburg's money. In total, we manage about $2.9 billion in city and town money here in the Commonwealth and throughout New England.
And who's our other guest?
Yes. Hi, I'm Kathleen Glowacki. I am vice president of the team as well. I've been here for about 8 years, but I was on the internal investment team for the majority of those. I just recently joined the kind of the outside calling team. But yeah, so thanks for having us.
All right. Okay. So we had divided this up into categories based on spending. Evan had done a good job of convincing me that my plan was kind of ludicrous. But I still think we should try to at least come up with a sketch for like what it is that we owe people. How do we want to do this? Who from the town is going to present the town's expenses?
I'll say Renee pulled together a slideshow. I'm going to request if we can go out of order and have our guests go first, instead of having them wait 2 hours.
Sure.
Oh, thank you.
Let's
Right,
do the
Chuck,
revenue part
Kathleen.
first.
Yeah, it's sure.
Sure. We're here to talk about the affordable housing and how we handle that as far as other cities and towns. Many towns have it, as we all know. And now that there was a law change, you can invest these funds in what they call the legal list, which is about 20 different stocks, very limited list. Then in August, a year ago, I think on August 9th, the governor signed into law what they call the Prudent Investor Statute. So the funds now can be invested very similar to what you have in your OPEB account, meaning anything that's out there to be invested in, and as long as your decisions are prudent for what the desire is. So how we would set it up is depending on which way the town chooses to invest. We could open up a separate account, or we can put it into the trust fund account. I'd sent to Ezekiel the motion article, I should say, to have the town go prudent. Cities and towns have always been able to go this way, but they have had you had to go to town meeting first, and then your state senator or state rep would then bring that article into Boston, where the general court would vote to allow you a home rule petition. That has now been fixed by the governor signing that. So if the town in these funds, in your other trust funds, choose to go prudent, you take it to town meeting. Hopefully they vote in the affirmative, and then we get off and get going on the prudent investing. So I think that's a brief summary. Is that what you need, Ezekiel?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to have you here. The committee had been talking about increasing our investments and having our interest rates higher, and this is probably the first step in that direction.
Yes.
I wanted the task force to have, if they had any questions directly to you as well. I know you'll be at the finance committee meeting on Thursday. There'll probably be
Sure.
more in depth, but this is more of an overview, I believe. But if anybody has any questions, floor is yours.
I have a question because I don't know anything about this. When we're talking about affordable housing money, where does the money come from?
Some have it through the CPA, some through grants. I'm not on that side to say where. I know I looked through, when you look at the Department of Revenue website, then I looked at the law book. Sounds like you can get this money in many, many different areas. And then how you invest it, it depends. And then your OPEB money, that's a whole nother avenue. And we have discussions with former town administrators and Mylene on the asset allocations that you have.
So does anybody from the town know where we're getting the money from?
Well, right now, we have the separate trust funds. That's what we're targeting right now. That's what Bartholomew holds. You know, we have the stabilization funds, we have the library funds, we have depreciation, we have scholarship funds. You know, this legislation Chuck is talking about is specifically targeted to OPEB. We can go prudent with our other investments as well, but this new legislation allows the OPEB to go that route as well.
So actually the OPEBs, they are okay already. Depending on Ezekiel, if we remember, Brian was out and you guys were talking about the investment policy and how we have to adjust the investment policy. So once we clean up the investment policy on OPEB, you'll have that available to you. The law that we're talking about is 203C as in Charles. And that's the law that will allow all of your investments, except for your stabilization, to go prudent. And you say, well, why would a town want to go this route? When you're looking at the investments that you currently have available to you, like I said, there's about 20 stocks, and a quarter of them are drug companies. And that's not a political comment. It's just a comment that says that you have a high concentration in one industry. So when you broaden your diversification, in theory, you should be able to do better. I don't know if Kathleen has anything further to say.
No, that's accurate. Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is just the legal list is really restrictive on the stock side and on the bond side. Even if you had a conservative portfolio, there's a very short list of things you know, we as your investment advisors could purchase. So it really opens up a lot of opportunity. And to Ezekiel's point of, you know, your desire to have a higher return over time, it's a good opportunity.
Mhm.
Patterson, you said you had drafted language that we could use for town meeting to allow the town to go use prudent investor rule instead of the legal list.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
That is actually the wording actually came from KP Law. So if you're currently using KP Law, it is their wording.
We also have we wrote a white paper just in like very layman's terms, what is prudent and some examples. So we can share that, as well, because prudent doesn't really mean anything. And so we wrote something that maybe could be helpful as well, just to inform the masses.
And we can have that document sent over if you so choose, so you guys can see it. So we'll have, we'll send it to Mylene and Ezekiel, and matter of fact, we just sent it out to another community this afternoon.
Does anybody else have questions? I'm sorry, I didn't know any of this.
I think it's a first blush in this whole thing to just give you guys a heads up.
Tony Carter had his hand up first.
Oh, go ahead, Carter.
I'm trying to understand. So the town has, in simplest terms, it's trust funds, which are often donations, gifts, wills that have been left to the town. And to some degree, what I'm going to call it's stabilization funds, capital operating, OPEB in this case. And then it has what I'm going to refer to as our general operation funds, taxes we collect, those we keep for payroll, paying accounts payable and the like. It was my understanding that 203C was generally applicable to trust funds, those first two groups of monies, not to our general funds monies. Can you, if that's a fair division of the kinds of monies we have, can you speak to each bucket as to the applicability of 203C?
Certainly. Hey, Carter, good to see you again.
How are you?
All right. Hometown, right?
Well, I just can't seem to give it up. What can I tell you?
Yeah, they're still trying to get me. I live in Rutland, so they're still trying to get me on the finance committee too. So, okay, very simply, Carter is correct. Towns have three sets of money. You have your general fund, and what they are, it's very restricted, very liquid. The longest you can do anything with would be a 3-year CD. Your bonds are 1 year, can't take any kind of risk. So safety, safety, safety. The next set of money would be your trust funds. I'm gonna treat trust funds and stabilization in the same bucket, but I'm gonna pull stabilization out. There's a second bucket of money, separate law, that allows you to invest and allows you to go out longer and allows you to buy stock. And that's where the legal list comes into play. So you're taking on more risk, and those are the endowments, the cemetery perpetual cares, that's what that is. Then in August of last year, the governor signed the bill to allow you to now take on more risks than that legal list for that cemetery trust funds, but not stabilization. The last bucket that Carter was referring to was your OPEB. OPEB is there, and it's all, besides of a, change of a investment policy that is designed to just very much like your 401k, your 457, your 403bs. They're designed to grow. You're going to have an asset allocation of 60-40, 70-30. When I say that, means 70% equity, 30% bond. You're going to be in the market. You're going to have the ups and downs. So the first bucket, you don't take any risk. Your last bucket, you take as much risk as you can stomach, if you will. And the middle bucket is somewhere in the middle. How's that? Any questions on that?
I just want to follow up quickly, if I might. So if we're looking to drive up the investment yield on the general fund, that first bucket we spoke of, what benefit, if any, will 203C give us?
Zero.
Okay, thank you.
So what you would end up doing, as we saw in the last year and a half, we saw short-term interest rates in treasuries go to 5%, 5.50. So your treasurers should be getting higher interest in your local banks. We have been talking to our treasurers, and we have been laddering out treasuries at 5.25, depending on the time. So we have been laddering out treasuries, and that really has helped on that local revenue to hopefully increase free cash. So that's where they're seeing it, their local banks, and certainly by laddering out treasuries. Kathleen, are we buying treasuries in Lunenburg? I don't think so.
I don't believe that we are, but let me check to not speak out of turn.
So 203C does not apply to your general fund.
Is it possible, Kate, for you to make me a co-host so I can share my screen? Mylene sent me a slide on this exact 3-bucket scenario that might help as well.
Perfect.
Yes.
That works
yeah,
too.
Yeah, that's right.
Very simple.
And we do not ladder treasuries for the town.
Okay, so when you're dealing with town meeting, you're really dealing with the bucket on the left-hand side. And then the only way really town meeting would get any kind of benefit on your stabilization account in that bucket in the middle. Because the more stabilization you have, the more return you have, then the more money you have to spend. I like that slide. It's very easy to understand. Thank you.
This is also in the Google Drive for everybody for the
Yeah.
budget task force.
And the only
Can-
one that we can't use the prudent investor stuff for is which one?
The one on the left.
Okay. I know the law was recently passed, but Mr. Patterson, do you guys have any idea about improvements in yield? Like what, one of the things we're trying to figure out is how can we make more money and spend less money? And it'd be helpful if you had some projections on what getting away from the legal list has allowed towns to do in terms of generating revenue.
I'll defer to Kathleen.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So where the legal list was much more dividend focused, prudent, at least how we're managing it. If you were to have, a 70-30 risk profile, meaning, pretty aggressive, 70% equities, 30% bonds, our conservative expectation, long-term is 6% annualized return. Let's call it, it could be this past fiscal year was much higher than that, double digits. During COVID, it was less than that, but overall on average, that's kind of what we're looking at, 6 to 7%, maybe call it. So, just the comparison really with the legal list, the stocks that are on the legal list are all, as Chuck said, they're dividend paying, there's no technology. They're companies that have been around forever, McDonald's, Altria, those types of companies. And so that's kind of what the difference is. Of course, it depends how much risk, you're willing to take on. Right now, bonds are paying you, like Chuck said, about 5%. It won't always be like that. That should come down at some point in the near future, actually. So that's kind of the difference, where the focus with legal list was dividends, was yield. With prudent, you can start to shift into total return. So now we're, maybe buying companies that don't pay a dividend, but their expectations to grow their stock is much higher than, let's say, a Bank of America, which you're buying for the dividend. So I could talk about that all day. Hopefully that sort of made sense, but it's a whole different way of investing. And so that's kind of our target. Of course, anything can happen, of course, but that's what we're seeing, at least what we've seen. The best comparison is OPEP, that we've been investing prudently for many years at this point, and that's what the experience has kind of been.
And when people go down this path, as Kathleen alluded to, we're going to work with the town to begin to see how the account is going to grow and not just spend the income. So if, for instance, you own, one of the big seven, you had a major run up, as we all know, and currently you don't own any of those. But if you did, you have all this growth in these stocks, and we would help in what we call 20 rolling quarters. And we begin to help the town manage these funds like a true endowment. So you're not just spending like when you get a call from the scholarship committee. How come we can only give $50 this year? Well, that's what interest rates were, and that's what the dividends were. So if we can get into a pattern of, spending some of the growth like pure endowments do, that's going to make everybody in the community happy. Particularly, the cemetery people and the library people. I know we were managing the library for a period of time, and we were following the law, and it's now by going prudent, you can experience more growth, unlike when you're on the legal list where you don't have that opportunity.
This is awesome.
So
This
can-
is just like free money. It sounds like you're telling us there's free money.
Yeah, there's risk. I don't know.
Blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
We're on TV, so you have to say it, right?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, or maybe
Sure.
more than one?
Yeah.
So I just want to repeat back to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, because this is not my field. The 203C enables us to be prudent with OPEB and the special legislation funds, like we see on the slide. So that's new, correct?
Correct.
The middle bucket has always been able to do the prudent investment. Is that correct?
It's actually the other way around. So you 203C, when you said that you can go 203C, so the OPEB is there by statute, but the way they wrote the statute and the way the investment policy is. So 203C was always the OPEB. The special legislation the legislation that the governor signed was affecting your trust funds, your cemetery perpetual care, your scholarships, your depreciation, and library funds. So it was
Okay. So
upside.
stabilization funds are still not prudent.
Correct, and neither is community preservations. If you
Okay. Okay, so I'm looking at, we talked about this at the last meeting, the FY23 year-end report. And I'm looking at some stabilization funds. For example, the PEG access stabilization, which is only getting a 0.75%. I don't know what it was for FY24, but and the other stabilizations are, 2.62%.
Okay.
So-
To answer that question, does it say current yield on that report?
Interest rate, it says interest rate on the sheet
Okay.
I'm looking at.
All right.
So
Yeah,
I'm
you're
interested in
you're
not
making
just,
more than that. You're making more than that because how we buy bonds. So depending on how treasurers report it, so for instance, the real number that probably should be there is what we call yield to maturity. Okay, so you have a regular bond or a CD that's going to pay you 2%. Okay, but then when we go out in the world, we'll buy a bond for $100,000, but we'll only pay $95 for it. At maturity, you're going to get the additional 5. So when we do the calculation, you might have had the yield of 2%, but because you got this additional $5, you actually made a lot more. If you recall, you guys have borrowed. If you may recall that when you borrow, the bank will give you a premium and then that lowers what you have to pay back. This is the opposite of that. I mean, we buy it at a discount, which increases the yield, versus when you borrow, they give you a premium and it decreases the yield. So the numbers that you're looking at, not having them in front of me, how we're managing them, I'm not sure if that is the correct number. It looks low. I'm sure it's not that low, because we should be showing, or the treasurer should have said something about yield to maturity.
Renee, do you have any follow-up questions for Mr. Patterson?
I don't know. I mean, you know, what I'm trying to get at is, okay, so it sounds like 203C maybe is giving us some new opportunities to increase the return on our money by different investment strategies, but I also want to get the most out of our investments that aren't eligible for prudent investing.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure that we've been doing that well. But this is my first glance at it, so I have to, you know, defer to others. But when I looked at comparing communities, and looked at what was that investment revenue, I think was the category it was called. I can't remember, but
Mhm.
we were not very good compared to our benchmark communities.
I'd love to be able to speak to that, but I do not know what the treasurer is doing as far as other banking relationships.
Yeah.
This is a very, very small piece of that money that you're referring to. The money that you're talking about is in that first bucket on the left, and that is all driven by bank relationships.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the FY, Zico, we don't have the FY24 numbers yet, do we?
No, I don't have it.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, that won't be out until the middle to late September.
Oh, okay.
All right, Renee, if you don't have any
Thanks.
questions,
Nope.
I'll move it to Evan. Evan, go for it.
Thank you. So to kind of follow up on Renee's line of questioning, with this, I'm looking at the same document that she was looking at. And in our liquid investments, I'm assuming that that is primarily going to be made up of just that left-hand bucket, correct?
Not seeing what you're looking at, I would assume so.
We're talking like well, I mean, so I guess the question for the town manager and for Ezekiel is, am I allowed, I mean, this is a public meeting. There's nothing stopping me from sharing this document, correct?
Yeah, it's perfectly shareable.
Okay,
It's all public information, Evan.
okay. Let me, oh. It says it's still disabled, Dr. Burnham.
I know.
There we go. Okay, so what Renee was referring to specifically, I believe, is this liquid investments category. And you're right, they are all banks or credit unions. But when we see things like investments account or other investments account here, another investment account, I mean, we have well over a couple $1 million sitting in quote unquote investments accounts, but they're in a liquid investment. So is that, where would that fall in this categorization of buckets? Something like that.
All right, what you are looking at is the information that the treasurer has to provide by mid-September, and it's a schedule of all bank accounts and monies that your town has, and where is everything. So what you have and how, so they're in bank, hometown, Bluestone, Enterprise, and so on. They could be CDs, they could be pretty much anything. But those are all your banking relationships. Why treasurers have money in different accounts, it's really up to the treasurer. But
Mhm.
to your point, you are 100% correct. Where the income that rolls up to free cash and local receipts is this money. So depending on what the treasurer does with her banking or their banking relationships, yeah, it can drive, investment income at the general operating side, clearly. And so that's what you're looking at. You're looking at the MMDT, for instance. There's two accounts there. It's Massachusetts Municipal Depository Trust, and they trail rates by about 90 days. So they will go up and down. It's a great opportunity when you have high interest rates. 3 years from now, she may not have had anything in there. Then you have all of the other accounts at Unibank and, Newburyport. It's up to the treasurer to move stuff around. I would rather not at this time get into rationale of why she might have something in certain accounts. But that's clearly your money that you have sitting in local banks. And
I know this is an impossible question likely to answer since you don't have access to what specific pot it's falling into, but is it likely that we have some funds sitting in these accounts that we could currently invest in a different way outside of just a local bank, or possibly through going prudent?
yes. Okay. So what you would have, if you could slide up a bit.
Yep.
Okay. So there's the student activities, they're going to stay there. They're just in the account. But you have a lot of these investment accounts. I don't know what they are. You have your sewer, trash, and water enterprises. You may be able to do something like with that. You have any of the stabilization accounts. You can move that out and you can ladder treasuries in that. Because the treasuries have done so well over the last year and a half, some of these lower yielding bank accounts could, have a laddered treasury portfolio. School lunch you can't do anything with. So what you have to do is you have to determine what each of these accounts are and then match them up to the law. When you looked at the 3 buckets, all that general fund money is chapter 4455. So if it falls under that law, everything has to be under a year, and then CDs up to 3. If it falls under chapter 4454, then it can no duration. You can go out as long as you want. So in each of these buckets, when I help a treasurer, for history, I used to be the treasurer of the town of Shrewsbury, and I'm past president of the Mass Treasurer Collectors. And I teach out at school, we just got back, I teach the investment class along with Kathleen, and I teach the trust fund class. What I'm seeing here is very common, very common. So yes, you could sit there and do an analysis of all of these bank accounts to determine, okay, can I move it from one account to another to capitalize on my income, minimizing risk? So the answer is yes, you can do that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Further down, we have our term investments. This is where we start getting into Bartholomew, obviously.
Yep.
Where again, this was FY23, so still kind of coming out of COVID, I assume, for interest rates, and not having this be a yield to maturity number. Should we likely be expecting higher percentages for these accounts in here in all likelihood?
Kathleen can confirm, but what we would recommend, that might be current yield, but we're recommending to really show what it is yield to maturity to put on that, and we're providing that to the treasurers. It's just a matter of whether they're posting it on this report to the state.
And
Okay.
you're, just for some reference, ending June 30th of 2024 for just the bucket of the trust funds, which I believe includes stabilization, it's around 5%, the yield to maturity. The current yield could be lower, to Chuck's point. I know we belabored it, but that's kind of what you should see if it's yield to maturity that's reported here. Because we're not a bank, it gets a little more complicated just on how we're doing, choosing our investments, but that should be more like what it is for this 24.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I think lastly is just we are very curious to make sure that, I mean, obviously this is over a year old now, and we'll see what we get in the middle of September to late September, but just that we have, $27 million. I know that not a lot of it can be touched because it's that first bucket. But to kind of reiterate what Renee said and what Tony has said, just it feels like we're not capitalizing on as much investment capability as we could. And that's, I think, probably one of the better ways that we're looking at generating additional income in the town without increasing taxes or anything.
Yeah, you always look at locals, things that you can control. Agree.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any more questions for Mr. Patterson or Ms. Glowacki? Not seeing any. I will move us along to the next item. You are welcome to stay, but you do not have to if you want to go.
Well, thank you. We'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you. Yes.
I just want to know what's
Thank you
behind
both.
your head, Mr. Patterson. There's something very colorful.
I know.
Over that is a mixed media artwork.
Oh, that is cool.
So yeah, it's mixed
Cool.
media. And we got that on a vacation in Arizona. So there's glass, there's copper, there's a lot of cool stuff.
Best Zoom background ever.
Mhm.
So thank you very much.
All right.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Right. So let's move on to our next agenda item, which is new business. All right. There was a gentleman, Jay Simeone, on for a second, and then he
He's on the
logged out.
finance committee.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It looked like he was in his car, so he may be
All
on
right.
his way home.
I just
He
wanted
is.
to make sure if we had a public comment, we'd take the public comment instead of having
Um,
them. Sure.
Hey, Tony, before we
Sure.
leave the investment topic, this came up last time, and Mr. Patterson mentioned it a little bit, the library and their investment, they were able to, was it in fact the library? Dave Passios wasn't, he thought it was, but then he was second guessing himself. I don't know if anybody,
I followed up on that, and I
Okay.
did learn it was the library, but I did
Okay.
not get to talk to anybody from the library.
okay. Okay, so at least we've confirmed it was the library, so good.
Yes, if it was the thing that Mr. Passios referenced, they
yeah.
did restructure, but I have not been able to talk to a board of trustee member from the library. It was on my
Okay.
list of to-do things.
Okay,
The other thing I wanted to just bring up, since we're all here, I reached out to the person that I know that did forensic accounting, and they gave me two names. One is a national firm, Marcus, and there's another firm in Concord, New Hampshire, Plodsnik. I can give whoever needs them those names and contact information to see if we wanted. I remember Renee had mentioned wanting to see if there was something that we could do to like review this, and you had mentioned using ARPA money, and then you said I was only half joking about using ARPA money. So I just wanted to make sure that we followed that up and
Yeah.
got names for people. I don't know if we still want to do that. I just wanted to put that out there.
I don't know if Carter and Ezekiel, how would we go about, and who does it, looks at consolidating accounts and reaching out to banks and trying to, get our arms around this?
I will say the time of the year is actually horrible because we're all reporting in finance. However, I did talk to the treasurer, and we have reached out to some banks to do some review of our
Okay.
investments and our interest rates. So we just have to follow up. I have some
Okay.
emails I have to go through.
Okay. Because like I
So
just
we
noticed
have started.
there's
Yeah.
okay, there's a PEG Access Stabilization Fund listed under liquid investments as well as term investments. I don't know if they need to be set. I don't know. It just, yeah.
Well, the liquid is for the operating piece.
Okay.
And then you have the term investments with Bartholomew. They have a portion of it that they're
Okay.
holding.
It just seems really long.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we had started looking at that, but like I said, it's that time of year.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Do we want to do the town first on expenses and then we'll go to the school side?
Sure. Dr. Burnham, can you let me share? Let's see. Okay. Is this coming through now? I hope. All right, so I spent some time the other day just going through DLS, which is still overwhelming and honestly a little intimidating to me, but this is what I pulled out. Just looking at general fund expenditures, this is per capita for Lunenburg going from FY 2019 to FY 2023. And it does go up. And when I looked at the percent increase year over year, the rate of increase, I mean, these are COVID years, so I don't know what to make. I don't know if this is normal, but we certainly have a higher rate of increase the last couple of years. And again, we'll see what FY 24 looks like. So that is for Lunenburg. Then how are the expenditures distributed among different categories? And what DLS does for the general fund, there's 7, let me get my thing here, 7 categories. This is automatically generated by the DLS report, so I can't take credit for the colorful bar graph, but general government in blue, public safety in green, education in the darker purple, public works in orange, general fund debt service, I'll come back to that. Unclassified and other. And I have no idea what is in unclassified or other. And this is looking again from FY 19 to FY 23. Education is, about half of our budget, so not surprisingly, that's the biggest bar. When I look at year over year percent increase for each of the 7 categories, public works is crazy, like big swings, and I just cut it off because if I scaled it to the public works numbers, all of these other lines would be squashed. So I don't know what happened in 2021 and 20 and 21. But debt service seems to be going down. Public safety is relatively flat and green. General government has gone up, but it's not every year. It's not predictable. It just seems to be an every other year kind of thing, maybe. The education consistently goes up. That's pretty much a straight line. Other and unclassified are variable, but I don't know what those mean. So that would be these two. They kind of follow each other. And then this breaks it up by percentages. The same 7 categories just gives you a different view. And the reason I did that was the easiest way for me to get the comps because DLS generates these automatically. So I did the combined list that Ezzy and I put together. So 29 other communities, 30 including Lunenburg. Lunenburg's pie chart is down the bottom left. I don't know what Athol is just not spending in education. Berkeley spends almost about 3/4 of their expenditures on education. So there are some wild differences, but you can notice some other colors changing, like the green is bigger. Let's see, here's Lancaster and Holliston. You can see the big chunk of purple there. So these are in the drive. You can look at the pie charts, but ones that I noticed, I want to call out. One is health insurance expenditure. I don't know, it's not in these 7 categories specifically. I don't know which category it falls into. It was on one of the other reports that I got out that broke it into some other types of expenditure, health insurance being one. So the red line this is Lunenburg from 2011, FY 2011 to FY 23. The red is the actual dollar amount of health insurance expenditure. You can see the increase, and then the blue is the percent year-over-year increase. So I don't know what happened here, that it really took a dip. It took a dip during COVID, and it has been shooting up since. And if you look at the expenditure compared, Lunenburg to the benchmark towns that we came up with, this is just actual dollar amount. So you can see Leominster and Fitchburg, not surprisingly, spend more money. But when you normalize it to percent increase just for FY 23, Lunenburg's second highest. Fitchburg is 1. So I think that reflects, 15% increase since last year in health insurance expenditure. Some town, I don't know what's going on in Shirley, that they've dropped, at least since last year. I have all the data for every town for every one of these years, but that's too many graphs for me to do.
Renee, real quick, do you know which of the comps have the same model for health insurance that we have?
I don't know anything about,
Okay.
I
'Cause,
haven't
like,
dove into that level of detail.
because
You
one of the
mean like
things that-
the school
yes,
covered by a
it's
town?
super weird.
Now remind me, when is that active teachers or retirement? I can't remember. Only one of, is that right?
Dr. Burnham, I don't know the answer to this.
It's our active staff.
Active, okay. And then when they're retired, it's not paid by the town anymore, is that right? I think, maybe.
I'll ask Izzy to weigh in on that.
I'm sorry, what was the question? There was a
When
breakup.
teachers, so active teachers, their health insurance is paid by the town, correct? When the teachers
Correct.
retire, is the town paying any of their health insurance?
Yes,
They are?
yes, it's part of the Medicare Part B reimbursement.
Okay. I thought there was a split at
it's-
some point, but
Yeah, it's not direct, it's a more of an indirect cost.
Okay.
It would go in the other.
okay. So this stood out to me. I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows what Fitchburg does, because this is again just looking at 1 year, but I think even the percent increase in FY 22, I think Lunenburg was still in the upper quarter, maybe third, I don't remember, but definitely above the midpoint.
That's interesting because I remember at MMA conferences and with Maya representatives, we were in 22 and 23, we were expected to get double-digit increases with health insurance increases. And then they came out at a lower level. I think it was like 5.5% and something else. So it makes you wonder who is making up the difference. I guess it's just outside of this comparison group.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what's the actual dollar amount here? It's about 2.5 million in FY 23. So I don't even know, Ezzy, do you know which category that would fall into?
I'd have to look.
Vice,
I want to say maybe unclassified or other.
yeah, I mean, that's what I've guessed, but. All right, so that's one thing that I noticed. And looking at some of the other, I guess I'll call them categories that came out of one of the reports. This is FY23 employee expenditure, so total salaries and wages. Here we are. Total number of employees. We're here, and then this is really crude, but I just took the total salaries and wages and divided by total employees to get an average. And we're above the midpoint, but it's pretty flat in here, I'd say. This is our total expenditures, how we compare to the benchmark. So we're above the midpoint here. General government. So the left side, these are actual dollar amounts. And then to kind of normalize, since we have Leominster and Fitchburg, dollar amounts are really skewed. I normalized to the percent of the total expenditure. So here's general government, percent of total, fixed costs. Again, I don't know what this is. So we're middle of the road here in terms of our percent of total expenditure. Then we're top of the class when it comes to debt service. I don't know if that's we're paying off the high school. I don't know what this is. I don't know what this means. I don't know if anyone knows.
It could mean that we're paying off our debt service at a faster rate. So it's just the expenditure. Our debt service has really gone down since we have no new borrowing throughout the last couple of years. So that's my assumption without diving
Okay.
in.
Because I know Heather advised, against any more borrowing and, last year and maybe the near term, whatever, handful of years, I don't know. So I was kind of surprised, and maybe she advised against any more borrowing. Because we are definitely, a little over 10% of our total expenditures going towards debt service, at least in FY23.
Her reasoning was also that we don't have an ability to take on debt that we do not bond out. Even though we have capacity, we have no way to cover the expense without without going to excludable debt for it. So those are the other debt services that she was recommending to not go for, was your sort of low, I forget exactly which ones they were, but it was basically anything that's non-excludable. That's the non-excludable debt.
I will say, Evan, I'll piggyback on that. With my conversations with Heather, as we paid off our existing debt, the rest of the town, all of our departments, the funding has swallowed our capacity to pay new debt. So that's what it is. It's not that we don't have the same funding level. It's just that those dollars have shifted other places. So in order to pay new debt is problematic.
So can I just ask a question to Evan and Ezekiel and maybe Carter? Anybody chime in here? So like when I went to law school, I took out a loan like everybody, and I decided to pay back my loan in 12 years instead of 20 years, which is the normal thing for lawyers. And it meant that we were more poor, but for a shorter time. If I were to make if I were to like change this over to the town, are we doing, the equivalent of paying it off in 12 years instead of 20 years? And is it necessarily better for us to do it on shorter timeframes or in higher amounts if, money is worth less in the future?
So what exactly?
Are we
what's the
being too
question?
cautious in how we pay down our debt service?
Well, it's based on the schedule provided beforehand, so it's not that, there's, I'd have to look at what the debt has been approved for in the schedule, but, some of the debt, you cannot pay before a certain point. It's based on the schedule and the rate set.
So, Ezzy, is it
Oh.
the payment schedule is predetermined?
It's
Is that
predetermined as before we borrow. So as you
okay?
go to town meeting and request, all that pay schedule's already been established.
So it's not like a mortgage. Let's say you take out a
Right.
30-year mortgage at 3%, and you can pay extra towards the principal, pay it off in 20 years if you want without penalty. But if you can invest the money you would pay towards the principal and earn more than 3%, you can't, there's not that kind of flexibility with municipal borrowing like there is with the mortgage in that example.
I
It's
don't
locked
believe
in. Your
so.
payment schedule is locked.
Yeah.
So there, first, let me speak to the word of capacity. There's the legal capacity, the amount of money that you can borrow. And that's a percentage of your total valuations. Then there's monies that you can borrow outside of that limit. You have to actually look at the statute and determine what is the project. And that'll tell you whether or not it's within that 5% or you can go outside of the 5%. Next, when you go to borrow that, you can do it like a home mortgage. That is to say, it has even principal and interest payments, relatively even interest and principal over the course. That will cost you more interest over the life of the debt, but it will provide you with lower annual debt service. And so I don't know which the town has done in these instances. Or there's even principal. You're paying the exact same amount each year, principal wise. So your total principal and interest declines as that balance declines. Now, as Izzy said, there is normally a redemption period in which you cannot pay it off early. So if the interest rates that you borrowed it at were 6.5%, as the interest rate crashed, it was not uncommon for many communities, if they were outside that redemption period, to refinance it at 3.5% or 4%. So you really need to, and that schedule, as Izzy said, is set when you go out to borrow. That's part of the documents. So in order to more fully understand the debt service, you really would need to get behind each instrument and see how you structured it at the time that you borrowed that money. And with respect to capacity, I suspect that what Heather was saying was more about your ability to pay, not the amount you could borrow. If I went insane, I could probably go out and charge $100,000 tomorrow. That's my capacity, my ability to borrow, but I wouldn't want to have to try to pay those bills the next month. That's our capacity, our ability to repay.
So does anyone know when will be, I guess, out of debt, when this debt service amount will go down?
I have a slide on that if you want.
Oh, okay. Because I'm thinking, we have a lot of buildings to deal with that are going to require money. Capital projects and so on. So I'm just wondering when we'll be in a position to borrow and how much.
We had the finance committee requested a couple of years ago from Karen Brochu and I believe, I don't know if it might have been through Bartholomew, but it was one of our investing companies to run a scenario extended out like 30 and 50 years to see what our borrowing capacity could be over that time with dwindling debt service coming off, and anticipated debts going back on. Nothing that takes care of any of the buildings in town, nothing that replaces a school, nothing that rebuilds a school or a town hall or any of that stuff. And it looked like the kind of magical number, what Carter was saying, his $100,000 for the town is $42 million. But there's no way to pay for that. And right now we're looking at, our right now our net excludable debt payment for FY25, our debt service was about 3 million, and in FY28 it's expected to be about 2.5 million as we pay off a decent chunk of our excludable debts. I believe one of the schools is coming off pretty soon. I believe it's in the next year or so. I think, is that correct, Dr. Burnham? Are we paying off the primary school?
That would depend on how long a term you had to pay back. If it was 20 years, then it's probably in that ballpark that it is the primary.
I think it might actually be. But we also have a sewer debt that's currently 300,000. We have our MSBA debt is currently $4.25 for this coming year. And then we have so our net excludable debt as well is 2.3 million. So it's going down, and it went down a little over $500,000 between FY24 and FY25, our debt schedule, and it will go down again.
Okay, because this has us at 4.5 million in FY23.
I'm curious so if we take and actually, can I share this real quick? Because I'd be curious what Hezi and Carter's take are on this. This is Heather's favorite slide to show at town meeting. So she likes to go through this slide specifically. And this was actually presented this past spring. So this is that decrease from our debt service from last year to this year. So we will have a lower debt service by that $576,000. The sewer enterprise is dropping substantially. We are paying off one of our MSBA loans. Maybe that might be the rest of Turkey Hill right there. We have the last $4.20 of it. The primary school. As far as the capacities go, this is kind of what Carter and Izzy were talking about. With you have the capacity within your levy to borrow more money, but we have no revenue source to pay for it currently. Until we get some of this to pay off, or we generate additional revenue somewhere else. Carter, did you have a question or a thought on this? Your hand's up.
Well, I wanted to comment, if you look at the FY25, and I want to talk about just the general fund for a moment. That's about 2,628,000, 2,630,000. Then when you look at it for 26, it's 2,360,000 roughly, which is a spread of about $300,000. The sewer enterprise fund has to carry that on its own. It's really kind of for purposes of the general fund out of the picture. And this frankly is a very challenging moment, because you'll see some communities where the debt goes up, the debt comes down, the debt goes up. And what happens is the minute that the debt drops, I know what happens in different communities, is everyone sort of wipes the sweat off their brow and says, oh, thank goodness, now we can spend $300,000 on something else. And what you're doing is you're kind of starving your future needs. There's a concept that I've referred to as debt stabilization, or flat debt, which is you kind of pick that number that you feel you can invest in your community each year, and different communities pick it in different fashions. And then you stay there. And so in a scenario like that, you would take that $300,000 spread and it would remain in the budget, but you would deposit it in your capital stabilization. Because otherwise, especially in a community that's relying upon excluded debt, because they kind of say to everybody, oh, it's debt excluded. Well, guess what? When the debt on that fire truck is paid off, they roll in with the next debt exclusion question. So I think that this concept of how much you can invest in your capital and what you want to do with that up and down kind of swing is something that you need to kind of have a conversation about at some point, particularly when you're staring down. You know, you drive by the public safety building, and by municipal standards, it looks pretty new. You know, but it's 20 plus years old, which means now you're into roof HVAC and other things. So it is something that really needs to be thought about a little bit. Not the cheeriest thought, I know, but
My other concern is that as we do pay off debt, that we just reallocate those funds to other departments, and then we continue to not have additional capacity to pay off a new debt that will eventually whittle that down to. And I think this may be exactly what you're saying, Carter, but this is how my feeble brain understands it, that as you're whittling that number down and paying it off to zero, that you end up reallocating all of the funds that you were paying for it. And now you get to zero debt and you have nothing that you can spend on new debt to pay for the new debt.
exactly.
Mhm.
Okay. Which I believe, this is kind of trying to remember what Heather was saying, this percent of net regular debt to levy, the 4% policy by policy. This is where we are currently. We're basically at zero, but we have no ability to cover any new regular debt
For the next 5 years.
for the next, until we figure out another way of allocating funds for forever. There is no source of funds that come in
Mhm.
to pay for that, because you can't levy it. At least with the excludable debt, it goes on to the tax levy itself. So it's sort of self-filling in a sense. It pays for itself because you levy that amount each year to cover that expense, that debt. But for regular debt, you have to have a funding source outside of specifically the levy, or
And-
outside of explicitly stating that this is to cover excludable debt within the levy, to increase the levy of the town.
And this is a naive question, but what determines if it's excludable or not?
I knew a few months ago, but then I put that out of my memory after budget season ended, and I don't remember it again for another 3 months. So I don't remember.
It's statutory, and I'll get you all the sections that define what is within the 5%, what can go outside the 5% cap. But in terms of how much of your budget you're willing to project, that becomes a local decision in terms of what you're willing to pay. So for instance, when you drop to 315 on the regular debt and you go to 150, perhaps you really leave it at 315 and you put 160 into your capital stabilization, some sort of approach like that.
Can you still do that though? Because that is excludable debt, correct?
I'm talking about the regular debt.
Okay. Okay. Yes. That will just disappear and doesn't have to be paid for, right?
Right. And now instead of sending it off to the bondholders, you're sending it partly to the bondholders, partly to your stabilization. And then when that's at zero, you can go back to your 315 plus what you've built up in your capital reserves.
but there's limits on what that money can be used to fund. It has to be for non-excludable debt.
But it's just the way you
Right.
broken it down. You can actually spend it on either. Um,
Okay.
it's the way you're carrying it on this schedule as I look at this. We'll get you a copy of that legislation.
Okay.
Back to your presentation, Renee.
Sure. Are you done?
I'm done with this. This was
Okay.
this, like I said, this is Heather's
Okay.
go-to.
All right. Public Works, we're kind of low, and I think the next slide has police. We're really, really low. When you look at a percent of the total expenditure on police, fires is in the middle. Other public safety, don't know what that covers. We're again below the midpoint in human services. Don't know exactly what that covers. Education, we're in the middle. It's kind of, most people are around 50%, so not surprising. Culture and recreation, I guess this is parks, maybe, and conservation, I don't know, but we're towards the bottom end. Unfortunately, DLS doesn't go in, well, at least when I looked, I couldn't find explanations on some of these categories, exactly what they covered. And this intergovernmental assessments, I have no idea what this means, but we're at the upper end here too. I don't know if anybody knows what this actually is. I mean, we're at the upper end, but I'm looking at, we're at what, the 3%. A little over $1 million, about $1 million. I don't know. Carter of Ezzy, if you know what that is.
Ezekiel, what is this?
I don't know what the term is referring to. I'm sure I can find out, but
And depending
stuff
upon
like
how
that.
you're reporting it, that could be
Yeah.
your agreement with the Neshoba Health District, your agreement with Neshoba Valley
The-
Dispatch
yeah.
District. It could be some of those. I'd have to see how you're actually reporting it to DLR.
Yeah, that's what makes this all difficult because even when we were looking at revenues, it looked like some revenue lines went to zero, but it just got moved to a different line. I mean, can be a nightmare, honestly.
And some communities report things in different
Yeah,
areas. Some, Board of Health is that in public. It's can be challenging at times.
yeah. Especially for like someone, not used to looking at this stuff like me, pretty much an outsider on this stuff. It's difficult. I think that yeah, that was all I had found. So I think the debt service, the health insurance expenditures were high. I was surprised police was so low. Other than that, I don't know if I have any other takeaways just based on this quick little dive.
So, Renee, the debt service sounds like stuff that we are contractually obligated to.
Yeah.
What are the things that we are paying that we are not contractually obligated to pay? Like, are there mandates that make us do certain things for public works? Are there mandates that make us have a certain number of police department employees? Are there mandates that make us have a certain number of firefighters? Like, we have all of these expenses, but if our job is to figure out how to spend less and generate more, where can we push them?
I don't know if we can get better healthcare. I mean, I know Brian Leighton, right, brought forward a high deductible HSA idea, right? I don't know if there's something with health insurance. I mean, health insurance is great, and I know municipals has, you know, restrictions and there's laws around health insurance and whatever. I don't know if there's some savings that we could get a better deal. Just like, you know, could we get better interest rates and yields on our investment by shopping around?
Who would do that in the town?
I don't know.
I would assume that it would be under the purview of the town manager when the contract for the current health insurance provider is up. I know we currently have a contract with Maya as the provider, with Blue Cross Blue Shield, but beyond that, I really don't know.
And I think this is something that's very unpredictable too. Right? You would know, well, not just you have a contract, but you know, people can jump on a family plan that you weren't expecting. So it's just, I feel like this is a unpredictable number. I don't know where things like our trash service, I don't know what category that falls into.
Thing that I had noticed about the trash service is that when we originally had started recycling, the recycling was essentially free because somebody would pay us for the material. And now we have to pay for recycling. That's my understanding. Look at the budget. How have we, this is for people in the town, how have we assumed that cost? Like I imagine it's a pretty substantial cost to now pay for recycling because we used the bags to offset the cost of paying for garbage. What are we doing to absorb the cost of recycling?
So in simplest terms, and we'll have the full package in front of the select board September 3rd. In simplest terms, you pay the hauler a fixed price per ton of materials that they recycle. They then deliver that either to their own facility or to another facility. And the percentage of different type of product is determined. How much glass, how much aluminum, how much bimetals, and so forth, and how much waste there is. Those products are then sold or paid to be hauled away. The biggest challenge is right now you're paying probably somewheres in the neighborhood of $20 a ton, plus or minus, to dispose of the glass. And you're probably paying another $10 to $12 plus or minus to dispose of the excess waste.
Carter, when you say dispose of, you mean they're not being recycled?
Well, they're to get somebody to take it. In other words,
Are they recycling it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but there is a portion that has to go straight to a landfill because it's simply not suitable for any form of recycling.
Okay.
So there's an actual formula, and they determine for that reporting period, did they make $53 a ton in recycling the materials after all the pluses and minuses for each product? $60 if they made 53, that comes off of your processing. So let's say you're paying 140 to process it. They get rid of it all, recycle it, dispose of it, come away with $53. In the end, you actually end up paying them 97. And so that's market driven based upon a formula that's part of the contract.
But correct me if I'm wrong, Carter, when we originally started recycling in Lunenburg, we were getting paid to do it, and now we're paying to do it.
Correct, not uncommon. The Chinese, there's a great, if I can find
Right.
it, I'll
Yeah,
send
no,
y'all the
I
link.
understand the reasons why. China used to pay for it, now they're not.
Yeah, Yep.
So one thing that I think we should consider is like, if we're paying people to take our recycling and we weren't before, then that's money that we're just losing, right? Like as the town.
it's still cheaper than paying for it as waste disposal.
Right, but we subsidize the cost of waste disposal by paying for the trash bags. We do nothing to subsidize the cost of recycling as a town.
We'll be presenting that on the 3rd, and I think that I just can't tell you today whether or not the pay-as-you-throw pricing needs adjustment to help. I think you do need to look at it as a program in its entirety, not simply separating trash from recycling.
No, I get what you're saying, but my point is, we are spending money now on something that we did not spend any money on before, and the town has not done anything to recoup those costs.
Possibly, yes, very possibly.
So like, maybe we sell blue bags for recycling or green bags for recycling as a way to recoup the cost, because what we essentially did was we added a service to the town and didn't tell anybody. Not that we were being secretive about it, but it wasn't something that we consciously made a decision to do. We just kept doing what we were doing, except instead of being a cost generator, it's now or instead of being a money generator, it's now a money loser.
Similar to the debt, it is something you need to look at various options over the next couple of years.
Sure, but like, and I don't know what select board is gonna do or what town or what the finance committee does, but like, has anybody considered presenting this issue to the town and saying, do you guys want us to keep doing this? I mean, is it a question of spend a nickel to save a dime, or is it we're just subsidizing this thing?
It will be part of my presentation on September 3rd, various options that I think need to be looked at by a group similar to this
Okay.
over the coming few years.
Okay.
By the way, nothing brings the public out like trash and dogs.
Oh, I know the dog thing. Whenever somebody wants me to lose a case, they have a dog do the search, and then you just lose the case automatically. Juries love dogs. All right, let's keep moving. So, Susan, I think, Dr. Gilson, I think you had the presentation for us.
I will pull it up. Okay, all right, so here we go. And I will bring it all the way to the start of the presentation. I looked at DLS and I'm finding it very interesting, like Renee is finding it interesting. I reviewed expenses specific to Lunenburg for all the town departments. And then I rank ordered the department expenses against categories across 19 different municipalities that were within our comparison groupings. I found that per pupil expenditures allowed me to calibrate between municipalities and municipalities that regionalized, and I compared those. I also had an opportunity to examine publicly available contract ranges for teacher contracts in terms of obligatory spending in terms of salaries. And then I looked at 5-year trend comparisons across the education department in the 19 municipalities to evaluate trends in per capita expenditures, which were very much like per pupil expenditure, comparisons of enrollment in the schools, and per capita expenditures in the town are basically comparisons of education spending when you're evaluating across all the residents in the town. I had an opportunity also to look at special education, and again, that's an obligatory spending amount. And I continued to examine, whether or not Lunenburg Public Schools should continue to operate as a municipality. We talked about that 2 meetings ago. So going forward, again, like we've seen in Renee's slide, the education is about half of the town's budget across varying municipalities. Obligatory spending forms the core of per pupil expenditure calculations. And, that is, essentially I highlighted salaries and also special education as well. Looking ahead, in terms of Lunenburg versus our comparative towns, again, out of 19 municipalities, essentially I ranked Lunenburg and in all the different categories. And like Renee, I also noticed that Lunenburg had a high debt service. Let's see, and we have, I would also say that our metrics or our comparative towns are slightly different. And that was something we noted at the start. So the bottom line here that I noticed is Lunenburg really has a no frills education budget. When you reintegrate and use per pupil expenditure as the main measure, you can look at the regional school districts in terms of their education spending, and also the municipal districts in terms of their spending as well. What I did note, if you look at Lunenburg, the salary for teacher contracts goes between $49,000 and $99,960. We are right now the lowest across the range, and we are hoping we can do something about that. And I think what's interesting, unfortunately for us, in terms of when our teachers get to the top step of the salary schedule, in shortage areas like special education, the sciences, and world language education, they actually can go to other districts and continue to be hired at the same top level step and make more money. And that's a real detriment to the stability in terms of the education programming that we can provide. In terms of special education needs, what I have learned across my experiences is that this is an area that could become out of control in districts. It is not out of control in Lunenburg. We have maintained it very, very well. As we've looked at our expenses, I want to say that, these are like anticipated costs per student. For out-of-district tuition, it's $129,000 per student. We have 10 out-of-district students, and then transportation is also an expense. And if you need a bus monitor, that's also an additional expense. However, there are offsets to special education, and I do need to mention that. And these offsets can be applied. They're grants that can be applied to out-of-district placements, collaborative placements, and supplies and services that are for students on IEPs. We've found, as we've examined our trends with special education, we've noticed that we saw these 2 interesting years at FY, like 10 years ago, we had 25 and 24 students in out-of-district placements. And we found that was stabilized with the addition of one, in addition to all of our other staff, by adding one board certified behavior analyst position in the district. Key aspects of a role of a BCBA, basically they're responsible for making data-driven decisions along with a team that target challenging student behaviors, and they provide in-house training on de-escalation techniques that allow students to remain in the district. And again, the slideshow is in the folder. So if you want to research what most BCBA's do, this is a part of the job description. Now, discretionary spending, we have obligatory amounts in our budget, but there's also some discretionary spending and where we're not mandated by laws, but we enhance our education programs. These are the types of things that go into discretionary spending. In my research on DLS, I think one of the other striking factors that I noticed as I looked into the general fund area, there was something called per capita expenditures, and they cite per capita expenditures across every single department in every single district in Massachusetts. And basically, it's the average amount of money spent on education per resident within the municipality of Lunenburg. And so I think when I came up with the figures, what I did was I looked at 5-year trends, and it was very interesting when I took the relative difference over 5 years, and I found that the change in Lunenburg over 5 years had been basically $53.72, which was very low in comparison with our other comp districts. So I cite that as a point of interest. And, essentially that's like looking at it across a time period of 5 years. 5 times 12 is 60 months, and we're only $53.72 higher.
So Dr. Gilson, is the population growth factor into that? Does it account for some of that?
The population growth?
Yeah, because it is per capita, right?
Right. Renee, I couldn't tell you, but you know what? I'm assuming that, when you compare it to 19 municipalities, it's just, we're on the lower end, and perhaps, we can research that more.
Yeah, I just know that our population has gone up. I don't remember the rate, but.
Yeah.
One thing, Renee, I wanted to point out for everybody, not just you, but the rate of inflation would have that number, I think, something like 8 times higher than it is. The rate of inflation over those 5-year period. I mean, we've had especially bad inflation over the last 5 years, but the rate of inflation means that essentially we're not even flat funding on a per person basis over the last 5 years. We're doing worse than flat funding them.
So that's a great point, Tony. And so again, in terms of looking at, this is our education budget here, in the year that I comped with in DLS was FY22. Again, like this was our debt service. And again, it's the 3rd highest out of the 19 municipalities. And so again, in terms of trying to analyze debt service, I think you all did a fabulous job about explaining it before, but that interested me and caught my eye. And I remember from the very first meeting, I remember Renee saying, well, gee, maybe we should, maybe we should consider regionalization. And, and I found, again, I looked at the population data that was available for different municipalities. And there are other municipalities that have smaller enrollments than us. We're too invested in a municipality, and it would take too much time to move into a regionalization sort of structure. So, so these were just interesting points that I found as I explored DLS. So
one thing I just want to make a mention of, and this was something that was surprising to me, when the school board plans out its budget, there are certain things that we control and certain things that we can't control. One of the things that we can't control is people coming into district that then have needs for out of district placement. And that represents a real cost shock to the system. And so minimizing out of district placements is a way to, as I said earlier, spend a nickel to save a dime. When you have a trailing funding source and the circuit breaker, the deductible, for lack of a better term, we're going to hit the deductible on all, I don't want to say all, but I think almost all of our out of district placements. And so if we have somebody come into town after the cutoff date, and Dr. Burnham and Dr. Gilson, you can tell me when the cutoff date is. If we have them, there's a space in time in which they could come in after the cutoff date, meaning we have to pay for them, even though they just moved in, where we won't get funding until the next year. And when we do get funding, we get paid back, but we don't get the entire thing paid back. That kind of shock is really, really difficult to deal with. Since I've been on the school board, we had this happen one time, and the costs were really extreme. I mean, it definitely screwed up our budget that year. And so in looking at ways to increase efficiency and increase savings, the cost of let's just suppose they are on the teacher's salary structure. So the most they could ever be paid in a year is $99,000. The cost they're going to save us by preventing kids from going out of district is pretty extreme. I mean, they're going to save us more, certainly that year. And then when we get the funding for the original year, it'll still be, a quarter of their salary or whatever the deductible ends up being, but it's usually about, $25,000. Spending money on BCBAs is an easy way to save money for the town. It just makes a lot of sense. And I think that, keeping our out of district placements down is one of those rare places where it is good financially, and it is also really beneficial for the kids. It's beneficial for kids that would never need out of district placement, but it's also really beneficial for kids that do need out of district placement. It makes everybody in the school better. It makes their classmates better. It makes them better. It makes their teachers better, and it's cheaper. So in my mind, this is a place where we should be spending resources, because these resources save us money elsewhere, and they prevent these really dramatic shocks to the budget that cause so much headache, last budget season. So I just wanted to highlight that as one of those things that, I'm keeping a punch list of things that we've talked about, and it's not going to save us as much money as Evan's consolidation of investments or increasing townside Medicaid reimbursements that Renee suggested. But I do think that Dr. Gilson's findings about BCBAs and out-of-district placements is a way that we can just save money. It's money there for the taking. And again, unlike a lot of the things that we've talked about, this is not money that we're saving by cutting something. This is money we're saving by doing the morally right thing and the thing that is best for student achievement.
Those are all great points. And I think that, again, I go back to that salary range slide, and I'm on it right now. But it's all of the districts around us. We have many we have some municipalities and many regionalized districts, but by and large, as you look at all the salary ranges, they are surpassing us by leaps and bounds, and it puts us in a very unfortunate position where we're spending an enormous amount of time engaging in the hiring process, and we are losing great candidates. And so, so I just wanted to point that out.
Can I ask you guys, and maybe Tony, this is for you. How's the transportation looking?
Oh, okay. So
Are you in witness protection yet?
I probably will be, because I got an email from our friend in Fitchburg saying we're gonna put this bill in the floor. So I don't know what it's gonna look like, but right now, the bill that I sent to our delegation would require busing companies to engage in competitive bidding, and the proposed regulation defines competitive bidding. And if they don't, then their buses don't pass inspection. My guess is that one of two things will happen. Either no one will notice and it will get passed into law, and then we will have some leverage to negotiate better prices, or it will cause a firestorm. And so that was the only thing that we can do, because we have no ability to negotiate. We have one and only one company that ever places a bid.
Yeah.
So we can't say no. And here's the kicker, Renee. We have an obligation under state law to provide busing for all students who live more than 1.5 miles away. And so we have
Right.
both an obligatory cost and no free market options.
Yeah.
So the hope is that the regulation that was written somehow makes it into law, or the threat of the regulation making it into law compels them to negotiate and competitively bid. I mean, it is remarkably consistent across the state of Massachusetts how few districts have competitive bidding.
I heard the same thing from Westford this
Yep.
year too.
Yep.
And I want to ask an unpopular question, but just because I want to ask every question. So we provide free busing to all students, even within the, is it 1.5 miles or 2 miles? I thought it was 2 miles, but whatever it is, the state mandated distance. And I know it's been done before where kids inside the whatever radius were not bused and it created traffic and whatnot. But does anyone know what the cost differential is there versus, busing all kids and versus the ones we are legally needed to bus?
When
We'd
Burns,
have to take a look at the actual ridership to figure out how many kids are actually living in the zone that we would be legally required to transport them,
Uh-huh.
and then figure out how many seats that is. The challenge is that it's not as simple as, oh, this many seats, we need 5 buses.
It's where
Because
they
the
live too,
the
right?
5 buses would have to cover the entire outskirts of the entire town.
Yeah.
And then the bus routes might be really long, and kids might be riding on a bus for a lot longer time to and from school.
Yeah.
The challenge for us was really much more about safety, because we don't have sidewalks in town. So that was the concern that actually drove the change to busing all kiddos.
And there was a very similar pitchfork and torch lighting event that took place when that policy was not enacted a couple of years ago. So going back on it,
it did not go well.
Have they ever because I know like my nephew is bus from Maynard to Marlboro and they pay, I don't know how much they pay. I guess you can't charge for living outside the 1.5 miles, right? That has to be free.
Correct. We would have to
Okay.
transport.
But inside the radius, I guess.
Yep, we could.
I don't want to put
that.
a fee on people. So if anyone's listening to this, just, I'm just asking the questions, just to ask all the questions.
We did that analysis, and it was going to be a rather extraordinary fee. If it were
to make it worthwhile, it would be the burden. Yeah.
Make it representative of the cost, I think. It wasn't that it would make it worthwhile, but like the costs of busing where we're not obligated to bus, it would be a real imposition on families. It was a lot.
Yeah, I think my brother pays something like 200, or no, if his daughter lives within, if to have her bused, it would be like $200 a year she's within the radius. Something
Oh,
like that.
I,
In Maynard.
Dr. Burnham, I wanted to say it was more than that. I thought when
Yeah,
we did
to cover the actual cost.
Oh, I don't
it
think, I think just
absolutely-
as supplements. I
Oh,
don't
okay,
think it-
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Cover actual costs. It's probably better for them to
Yeah,
just have Ubers for their children.
Exactly.
But
Okay.
I want to mention that if you charge a fee, then somebody has to be tracking and managing
I know,
and
there's overhead.
following, right? So there's
And chasing
costs.
people down.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there are costs that go with that too. And ultimately, if we're not charging a fee that covers the added cost, then we're not covering the added cost of the transportation. And we would now have the added cost of staff that have to track payments. So in the end, it just was not going to be beneficial to charge that fee.
Renee's question. We were doing this debate. I thought it was the case that we were able to get everybody who wanted a seat, and we didn't end up having to add a new bus. Is that correct? Is that
We added a half a bus.
Okay. Yeah, so we didn't add a
So
full bus and we still got everybody that wanted in. So it's not like the state radius is making a big difference in our busing costs.
well, we were busing kids before
Right.
Above and beyond what we would have been required by law. It's 2 miles or more up through 6th grade. So we're not obligated to transport students after 6th grade. And we're not obligated to transport students inside of 2 miles. However, if you look at the guidelines for DESE relative to transportation, they use language that opens the door to this safety conversation. And again, the town has no sidewalks, or very few. So you open this conversation up every time, even for students who live literally across the street from the school campus. There's no sidewalks for them to safely navigate to school.
For people
Yeah.
watching, I just want to point out, we're not assuming they're getting not bused at 6th grade because they're 16. We're doing a better job of educating than that.
I was gonna say, holy
Yes, we
cow.
are.
Like, wait a second, they think we do a terrible job. 16-year-olds in 6th grade ain't happening.
Is it feasible at all to look at traffic monitor people instead for a certain smaller section within the campus?
We did that.
Typically, the traffic monitors cross kids at crosswalks from sidewalks, so there's that issue. But we actually did post and try to hire, and we have 0 applicants for these jobs because they're not a very well-paid job, and we had 0 applicants for that.
Didn't we have a
Maybe we
job
can work it into a senior tax break.
We tried that too.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Yep.
Didn't we post the job for 2 years? I thought we had the job posted 2 years and 0 applicants.
Yeah, no applicants. Because the parents still make the argument that it doesn't matter if you have a crossing guard, because if my kids can't walk on a sidewalk to get to the crossing guard, then it's not safe.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to point out, and I'm not saying this like Renee, I'm not saying this because this is what I want to do, but I think it's worth putting this on the table. There are significant expenditures related to discretionary spending at the school. However, during the budget process, when we talked about putting these things on the table, the community went ballistic. And in some cases, rightfully so. But the problem is those costs are things that people say they want, but then when you deliver the bill, they don't want to pay it. And so that's kind of a problem because, when whatever the budget task force concludes is necessary, it's probably going to include an increase in taxes somewhere. And my concern is that people won't want to pay that, but also, a lot of the stuff we do in schools, we're obligated by law, but the stuff that isn't obligated by law, they won't be willing to let go. And we've talked about this ad nauseum in the school committee, but there are certain positions where there's like real money there and we don't have to do it, but the town won't let it go. And so we're sort of stuck in this catch-22 where it's like, you need to either pay more in taxes or have less in services. And the answer is no. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't work. And
That's true everywhere, right?
Yeah.
That's true on both. Yeah.
I do have to say though that like I don't know how much more bad publicity you can get than saying that you want to cut athletics. Because like I said that and it was 1 million bad emails.
Well, I don't know. What if we said, Carter, what if we said we're gonna not have curbside trash pickup? You're on your own.
Can we do that after I'm gone and you're on your own?
I think we'd hear the same.
Okay,
I mean,
all right.
right? I mean, we're not legally obligated to
Yeah.
enter, right?
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question on Dr. Gilson, your one of your slides that you had in there about the per pupil comparing towns? You
Yeah.
showed Maynard on the top of that list, which spends almost double per pupil and has about 300 or 400 fewer students than we do, and has a similar budget and pays their teachers more.
Mhm.
How?
Where are they making up their per pupil expenditure?
I would have to dig much further than this.
Okay.
Figure it out. But I also found too, to be quite frank, even with towns like Ayr Shirley, which also has a similar enrollment, they have higher teacher salaries. And even looking at like Ashburn and Westminster, they're still paying their teachers more as well with their wage scale. So it's, looking at where the shifts are in the budgeting practices. I mean, in general, I will tell you, if we parallel this across the board, it's not only teacher contract, it's custodial contract, it's paraprofessional contract, it's cafeteria food service. I think all of our contracts are basically, we're kind of like hanging on, but the invisible thing is the excessive amount of time the entire team is engaged in interviews with failed higher rates. Offers have been made to candidates, and they, and some actually do sign, and then they let us know, oh no, I can't take that because the wage is too low. So I don't know. So looking at the total stability for the school system across the board, and our ability to attract great candidates, that are strong and sustainable, I don't know. I'm getting the sense that we really do have to look at the wage qualification schedules for all the different units.
I agree. Doing a quick back of the envelope multiplication of just the per pupil times the pupil, there's a $3 million difference between Maynard and Lunenburg. Where Maynard has an additional $3 million. It's in there. I mean, is that likely to be then, I assume, chapter 70 most likely? Or I would guess that that would be kind of the most likely kind of cash that they could come up with. I'm sure that there's other ways to get the funds as well, but
Yeah, not sure. You
okay.
know, without doing a like intense like analysis, like, you know, this thing for this thing, you know, and trying to
Mhm.
compare all the apples to apples. So
Okay.
fair enough.
One thing I wanted to let everybody on the budget task force know that I did not know, though Dr. Gilson and Dr. Burnham know, is that the bottom number is almost always wrong or irrelevant because very few teachers, given the mandatory state requirements for advanced education in teaching, very few teachers are hired on that first step. So if you were to knock out the first step, and Dr. Burnham, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we then switch places with Maynard and we are actually the lowest. We are lowest at the bottom and lowest at the top. So like the fact that we are not lowest in an absolute sense is only hidden by the fact that we rarely hire teachers at the first step.
In the bachelor's column.
Yeah.
But for, if you look at the higher end of the step, you know, we have 13 steps in our schedule, and many people work in education longer than 13 steps. But, you know, let's face it, if you are making Neshoba's top step of $111,986, a cumulative effect of that over your life is going to result in much higher income bracket than leaving it at 100 grand.
Yeah. All right. Are there any other questions on the school side of stuff? All right. I don't think we have, oh, public comment. Let's go to public comment. Is there anybody on the I wish the budget task force consigliere, Mr. Passios is here, but he is not. Anybody have any?
Maybe we
public
should
comment?
go call him and check on him.
Okay. Anybody else have any public comments?
I have questions and then I don't know what's up next.
Sure.
Maybe an action item. One easy thing, minutes. I ran into Laura last week at the training with the police and fire for the active shooter. And she said she was working on the minutes for the first meeting, but I I thought Laura was gonna do all the minutes, but maybe not. But I don't want to fall too far behind because I know the select board is way behind. That was one thing. The other thing, going back to the last meeting, I don't know if anyone had a chance to look into that precipitous drop in, what was that category? Miscellaneous non-recurring cost or something? That happened. I forget what year that was. I don't know if that could end up being a dead end, or maybe we'll actually learn something. I don't know. I don't know how to go about doing that or where to start. If somebody
Renee,
could point me in the direction.
I believe that was the point where you said, I want to have an accountant that specializes in municipal accounting. Tell me what this is and where it went. And so it was tracking
Yeah,
down
I don't
that-
know if they know. I think I think we need someone like Heather who knows the history of town, who was here. You know, we lost some institutional knowledge. I don't know if maybe Karen knows Ezzy, because she would have been here during that time.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I can reach out, and
Um,
also I can see if I can dig in through the history
okay.
as
I
well.
mean, if there's somewhere to dig into, I can try to dig and see what I find, but and coming up next, Tony, because I don't remember. I mean, talking about, I don't know, cost savings in terms of consolidation or efficiencies or outsourcing, anything like that. Capital, what else? I mean, I feel like at some point, like the health insurance expenditure, is now the time to start digging into what some of those other towns are, how they have their healthcare set up, or
I think Dr. Burnham, Dr. Gilson, is that something that we could do? Is that something that's, I mean, I know that the CBAs should be available on the Labor Relations Board's website. So we could take a look. I'm not sure if that would be the place to go.
It might be easier for us just to create a survey and send it to the
Okay.
the different comp districts and ask for that information.
also just so you guys know, I just got a text from Carter. He had to drop off. They're getting bad storms. He'll try to dial in. I think he lost internet. They're getting lightning and it's
I
raining
think
here.
we're almost done, right?
Yeah.
Pretty pitch black here.
Yeah,
It's
I can
totally
hear the
black.
rain pounding, but no lightning yet. I guess I'm looking for input from everybody. You know, we're doing a lot of DLS data gathering and things, and at what point can we actually start making sense of it and coming up with some recommendations? What other information do we need to do that?
I think we need to reach out to the other communities. Now that we have information, I think going to them and saying, why is yours different? Why is this, why does Athol spend 20% of their budget on education? How are you doing that? Are you allocating it in your general government somehow? What's different? Because otherwise, comparing the numbers are just that, they're numbers. They don't
Right.
tell anything more granular.
I
So I
also
would
think
almost say, do we come up with a general kind of question request document that we can send to town managers or superintendents or finance directors or?
Yeah.
Renee, the other thing is, I do think that like the next meeting that I had put on the agenda was for getting input from stakeholders. I think we've got to have an understanding of what they view our future costs as being, because if we come up and like I'm just keeping like a punch list of all these ideas, discrete ideas that we've had. If we come up with like a punch list of 20 items and the total savings is like 10% of what the stakeholders need, I think we need to know that sooner rather than later. So having them weigh in and tell us what they anticipate. I mean, like, I can tell you that the teachers, looking at the school's attrition rate, it is not sustainable. We will not have a school system at this rate. It is too many people. And so like we've got to do something, and I think we've got to do something rather drastic to keep them. And like we should know what they think is necessary. Because if we go out and if we have all this comparable data and we figure out what the other towns did to save money, and we create a plan that says this is how much we can anticipate savings if you enact every one of our recommendations, and it's still only 10% of what we need, we're in a lot bigger trouble than we think we are.
Yeah, because I keep coming back to, I'm worried, about paying this debt service really,
Yeah.
really scary.
Fortunately, we don't have any need for anything ever in the future, so we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. No.
When I make a suggestion, we should have, I don't know, I think we should invite the master planning steering committee to see where they stand.
Okay.
It just seems like that really their focus is in the future of Lunenburg, and just to see. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like they're looking, high in the sky with no regard to cost. It's a dream. I mean, yeah. It's good. And it helps, like, this is important. This is important.
Just a
But
thought.
yeah, no, but that's one concern I have about that is I went to a couple of meetings and it was, hey, anything you want, it's all on the table. Never mind how you're going to pay for it.
They're also still very much in the information gathering phase. We were supposed to finally have a presentation, but there wasn't a quorum at the meeting. So it's been kicked off until I think Josie stopped the meetings until at least September to kind of wait for summer to get by. So we haven't had a meeting since June,
Okay.
maybe July. But hopefully by that time we'll have had a presentation by the consulting firm
Mm-hmm.
to say, here's what we've gathered from all of your residents. Here's kind of at least the priority list, not necessarily what it's going to cost, but
Yeah.
is it more in infrastructure? Is it more in housing? Is it more in development of, green spaces, whatever it may be.
The other question that we had when we were meeting amongst ourselves was, for the stakeholders, do we want them to come? Do we want to meet with them individually and then present it to the group? How do we want to organize the meeting?
I would say to come to the group. Who are the stakeholders? Who?
Like anybody that like that, the town employees that are like the public service people, the
Department
teachers
heads?
unions, yeah, the teachers unions, those kinds of people that have either control of the budget or control of the employees as a collective unit. Because again, if our vision of what we can save is like 10% of what they're telling us we need, that's a disaster. Like one of the things that has changed dramatically in the last 3 years in terms of labor relations in education is the willingness to engage in strikes. And a strike in a town as small as ours, with a budget as tight as ours, would be catastrophic. And so it might be nice to know what they think is necessary going forward to avoid that kind of problem.
Yeah, I think I'd also like to hear from the capital planning committee.
I did put capital planning as their own separate meeting.
Okay. I don't think they have a 5-year plan. I don't even know if they're gonna get to it this year, actually. Because they're collecting capital requests earlier, right, to try to get a jump on the budget. All right. So what's my homework, Tony, for next time?
I think that we need to just figure out who we're going to talk to bring them in to tell us what they want. Like,
Should we come up with a list of questions for which towns, or that we could send out to town managers or whoever makes sense to? Whoa.
yikes.
Hey, I saw that too.
Really?
Oh.
You must live near me, because I
It
saw
didn't
that.
thunder yet, so it's far, but
There it
there
is.
it is. That was bright.
I saw it on your screen at the same time I came
Oh,
in.
I'm right by a window. It really
Yeah.
startled me. Yeah. Anyway.
It's like it moves at 186,000 meters or 186 meters per second.
I think we just go to them and say, what do you envision your costs being? Or if it's the unions, what do you envision your raises being?
Oh no, I was talking about digging into the data that we've collected to
Oh,
figure out
okay.
how these other towns are
Oh, yeah,
doing
yeah,
what they're
that
doing
might be
with what they
helpful.
have. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm confident that the unions are going to say more, and that the budget or the heads of each unit are going to say more.
All right. That's all I had.
All right. Anybody have anything else? All right, then anybody want to make a motion to close this out?
Oh yeah. So moved.
Oh, second.
All right. Back to everybody later.
Thanks everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.